In Part 1, we have attempted to provide a general overview of the Zell's entity theory. It has become apparent that the description in Part 1 fails to provide a clear conceptual understanding for many. Therefore, before moving on to the description of Part 2, the content of Part 1 can first be briefly explained in another way. The title of our video is The Zell's Entity, which refers to a group of entities that act like a single entity, and the subtitle of our video is How Consciousness Emerges in the Human Brain. This is a theory about a subject that people have boundless and unquenchable curiosity in. Generally, for all individuals, I consider myself a unique, independent, single entity. That is, my entire body has a distinct, single entity or soul, and I make my own decisions and act accordingly. However, this theory and the findings of the research are completely different from people's common beliefs and assumptions. The core theme of this theory is very clear. I am a single neuron cell located in the pulvinar. There are some special kinds of functional neuron cells in the pulvinal. I am one of them, that is. I am one of the neurons of that special kind of functional neuron cells located in my pulvinar. Pulvinar is a part of the thalamus. This pulvinar portion is very small in comparison to the overall size of the entire brain. Within the pulvinar, different kinds of information that we perceive are integrated and coordinated. Nevertheless, some types of information follow indirect pathways. Since I am a single neuron located within the pulvinar, there are, however, several other identical neurons right beside me, within the pulvinar, that have the same perception or awareness regarding the outside world. That means they are thinking and feeling almost the same things in the same way at the same time as I am. The mystery here is that we don't comprehend the issue, or it could be said we're not accustomed to thinking in this way. At first, it might seem peculiar and unbelievable to us, just like how it's initially hard to understand that the Earth is rotating upside down in space, or to grasp the concept of relativity, space and time. Our body's blood cells have their own life functions and their own lifespan. If these blood cells are transferred from one person's body to another, they can continue to live and function in the same way as they did before. It can be noted that the life functions and lifespan of these blood cells are completely different from those of a human being. This means that blood cells have a separate life of their own, with distinct realms of perceptual awareness and consciousness. There are many organisms whose bodies can be divided into multiple parts, each of which can survive as a separate organism. Planarians are one such animal. They can be split into two parts, and each part can transform into an individual organism. Some plants can be divided into multiple parts, each of which can grow into a separate organism. This suggests that each part of that organism had its own separate life, and they functioned together as a single life, but acted like a single entity. Similarly, the different parts of our body can be transferred from one body to another, and they can survive and function in the same way in another body as they did before. Since a cell can be transferred from one person's body to another's and can continue to survive and function in the same way as before, therefore it must possess its own separate life and perceptual awareness as an individual entity. In other words, every living cell in our body has their own distinct entity, life, and perceptual awareness. Let's consider a thought experiment. Suppose for some reason, one of my hands or legs had to be cut off and removed from my body. In that case, I would be able to see that part of my body rot, decay, and eventually decompose, just as we can observe when a rat or any other animal dies and decomposes. That is to say, first and foremost, I and my existence are not within this part of the body, nor was I ever present in it. Secondly, it was merely a tool for me, like a hammer, which I could use in various ways as needed. When this part was attached to me, there was only a kind of connection with it, nothing more. It can now be thought that, currently, I have lost that tool. In reality, the same explanation is applicable to all the organs and parts of our body. Similarly, our Pulvinar uses all other parts of the brain as tools, just like hands, legs, and other parts of the body. Actually, as the Pulvinar is directly involved in communication with the outside world. Therefore, for the question of survival, Pulvinar gains this privilege from all other parts of the brain. One important question is why it is the Pulvinar, rather than other parts of the brain, that is so intensively involved in communicating with the outside world. This will certainly be explained here in Part 2. In Part 1, the core theme of the theory has been explained with the help of Figure 1, featuring an example with a little girl named Raisa. If Raisa is represented by R, and if n number of neuron cells of her pulvinar together form Raisa's Zell's entity that is denoted by Raisa R, that is, Raisa R equals R1 to Rn, which is maintaining specialized communication with the outside world. Here, each R1 to Rn is an individual Raisa. All of them think that she is Raisa and that she is unique. Each of R1 to Rn considers herself as an individual, independent, and total body is a single entity. That is, contains a single soul, making her own decisions and act accordingly. However, none of them are able to perceive the existence of others because they function collectively as a Zell's entity. Since they all, R1 to Rn, operate within the same system and information framework, there is almost no difference in their realm of perception. This is the most significant aspects of this theory. The basic level of perceptual awareness of an individual neuron of R1 to Rn, that is Raisa R, which eventually at some stage emerges up to a level of self-perception or self-awareness or consciousness or full consciousness, depends on the amount and type of information it receives and its ability to exchange information. There is no unusual thing that has arrived here separately, and no supernatural thing is happening in the brain. From the outside world, everyone is communicating with the very Raisa R, collective responses and activities of R1 to Rn, a Zell's entity. From the perspective of the outside world, it is not possible to distinguish them as distinct individuals. Raisa R1, R2, up to Rn. Here, all of these are related to information and communication. Just imagine, I'm alone in a room, watching a live football match on a large TV screen. If the power goes out or signal transmission stops, or I fall into a deep sleep, what happens is simply an interruption in the flow of information. An even more serious thing we might consider is that if a living person has no information or memory and lacks the ability to analyze information, he will just pass through the flow of the present. That is, retaining only a basic level of a perceptual awareness of self-existence, where there is no existence of past and future to himself. One important question is why I am in the pulvinar rather than in other parts of the brain area. In other words, the important point is why it is the pulvinar rather than other parts of the brain that is intensively communicating with the outside world. In that case, we have to find the area in the brain where visual, auditory, tactile, taste, smell, pleasure, and pain-related sensory information is directly or indirectly accumulated according to the required value. Emotion, addiction, and related forms of information and perception can be incorporated in some way within the framework of pain and pleasure. In most cases of signal transmission and processing in the human brain, time-based information transmission is sufficient for a neuron cell to perceive that information. However, in the case of visual information, it is technically completely different. Each piece of information requires an address. Otherwise, it is not possible for an individual neuron cell to perceive the three-dimensional space of the outside world. The human brain employs a special technique to overcome this problem. In Part 4, we will explain how these events take place. Another important question is why each individual neuron cell, some special neurons of the pulvinar, needs to get all related huge information and needs to have all related huge information pass through it. This query is also related to this theory and research. We can get the answer of this query from some basic principles of AI neural networks. In Part 4, we will also explain how these things happen. Now we come to the main question: why I am in the pulvinar rather than in other parts of the brain. It is true that, apart from the pulvinar, there are a few other areas in the human brain that seem as promising as the pulvinar. These are: 1. Posterior parietal cortex, PPC; 2. The anterior insular cortex, AIC; and 3. Midbrain, mesencephalon. Now the question might arise why the pulvinar is the appropriate area. Posterior parietal cortex, PPC. The location of the posterior parietal cortex, PPC, is shown in Figure 2. The PPC is highly functionally divided and occupies a large region of the brain. The PPC does not receive raw visual inputs. Say, for example, we imagine a person walking on a road. At this point on the road, it is not possible for him to perceive the entire map of the city. Therefore, from our analysis, all of this together makes it difficult for a neuron of PPC to form a unified sense of the outside world space, and at the same time, it is difficult to receive all the other related sensory information. The anterior insular cortex, AIC. The location of the anterior insular cortex, AIC, is shown in Figure 3. Scientific evidence suggests that the function of the AIC is to provide a subjective representation of internal bodily states. Another important point is that the left anterior insula, LAI, and right anterior insula, RAI, are structurally symmetrical but can exhibit functional asymmetries. Therefore, from our current scientific understanding, all of this together makes it difficult for a neuron of AIC to form a unified sense of the outside world space. And at the same time, it is difficult to receive all the other related sensory information. Midbrain, mesencephalon. The location of the midbrain is shown in Figure 4. The position of the midbrain is very close to the pulvinar. It actually helps the pulvinal. The midbrain, mesencephalon, is a small but important part of the brainstem that serves as a relay center for sensory and motor signals and controls visual and auditory reflexes. The midbrain receives a very specific type and small amount of visual and auditory data for reflex actions. Then all of this together makes it difficult for a neuron of midbrain to form a unified sense of the outside world space. On the other hand, the pulvinar can be considered a coordinating and integrating hub for different sensory information in the human brain. The pulvinar is part of the thalamus, and the thalamus receives direct input related to visual, auditory, tactile, gustatory, pleasurable, and painful stimuli, whereas olfactory input follows an indirect pathway, which is generally not regarded as significant. The location of the pulvinar is shown in Figure 5. Here, from a functional perspective, the pulvinar's structure and location are very crucial. Thus, for a neuron of pulvinar, that is, simultaneously some specific neurons of pulvinar, it is possible to achieve visual perceiving capability by forming a unified sense of the outside world space, and at the same time, it is possible to perceive all the other related sensory information. The pulvinar acts as a decision maker by modulating and guiding the prioritization of stimuli. As a part of the thalamus, the pulvinar gets all information related to visual, auditory, tactile, gustatory, pleasurable, and painful stimuli. It is like a distributed control system, DCS, which is used in large industries as a centralized electrical and electronic control system. In a distributed control system, DCS, in engineering, particularly in a very large industry, a large number of PLCs, programmable logic controllers, robotic microcontrollers, and other components are used. Although these PLCs and microcontrollers operate independently, they can be further instructed or guided by the engineering station, ES, or operator station as needed, based on situational demands. The ES configures control loops, sets parameters, and monitors the health of the system. This means that the ES holds the overall information, analyzes it, and sends the results to other parts accordingly. Similarly, the pulvinar, through or including the thalamus, has extensive bilateral sensory connections and communicates with other parts of the brain. Thus, the pulvinar acts as a decision maker by modulating and guiding the prioritization of stimuli. Using mathematics, we will provide a clearer explanation of what actually happens. The diagram presented in the figure illustrates the structure of a basic biological neural network. Although the diagram illustrates the input-output correlation, synaptic plasticity, network connectivity, feedback loops, biochemical signals, modulation, and other stimuli further influence the resultant output. It is important to note that this basic biological neural network is applicable to the neural networks of all locations in the brain. Now, the diagram can be expressed as mathematical relationship. The output of the activation function V-out is shown here. We can simplify the output of the activation function by representing the summation of all different types of beta values as a single combined beta. Now, from the output of the activation function, we can express it using the firing threshold equation used in neurons, where tau is the firing threshold. In a biological neural network, the threshold value, tau, is an important factor for the activation of both the postsynaptic neuron and the motor neuron. The threshold value is not necessarily equal to the sum of the output values of interneurons. The threshold value, tau, is a predefined limit that a neuron must reach to fire an action potential. The general principle is that a neuron will fire an action potential, that is, activate, when its membrane potential reaches a certain threshold value, typically around minus 55 millivolts to minus 50 millivolts, relative to the resting potential of approximately minus 70 millivolts. That is here when the value of V lies between the threshold values, tau, equal to minus 55 millivolts to minus 50 millivolts. Then the corresponding neuron will fire. The interneurons processes and relays signals between neurons, and their outputs are typically summed at the receiving neuron, postsynaptic neurons. If the sum of excitatory and inhibitory signals, weighted inputs, from interneurons exceeds the minimum threshold value, the neuron fires. Whereas if the sum does not reach the threshold value, the neuron remains inactive. In a given set of circumstances, the threshold may be a fixed value, while the sum of the interneuron's outputs remains a variable that determines whether the threshold is reached. The threshold value is not a universal constant. Rather, it depends on various factors that influence the activation of output neurons in a biological neural network. The pulvinar, as part of the thalamus, can function as a regulatory hub through ascending, descending, and feedback or looping pathways. There are numerous ascending and descending pathways in the human brain involving several key systems. These pathways are often categorized or described in different ways. To facilitate systematic description, the 5 commonly recognized major ascending pathways are presented below, along with 2 related systems: the reticular activating system, RUSH, and the reward system. Similarly, the descending pathways are classified into 2 major, commonly recognized categories. You can pause the screen to read the detailed descriptions. The pulvinar's interactions can be categorized into 3 types: autonomic, semi-automatic, and decision-making processes or systems. Now, some examples of autonomic, semi-automatic, and decision-making processes and systems are described here. 1. Autonomic system is known as the autonomic nervous system, ANS, or involuntary nervous system, operates without conscious control. Examples include heart rate, digestion, blood pressure, pupil size, etc. 2. Semi-automatic system, also called subconscious system or semi-automatic brain function. The brain has trained itself to run the task in the background, but can pull it back into full attention if required. Examples include typing, driving, saccadic eye movements, language fluency, etc. 3. Decision-making system, also called the cognitive control system or conscious decision-making system. The cognitive control system refers to the brain's highest level control center that handles reasoning, judgment, planning, and decision-making, involves conscious awareness, and integrates information from emotion, memory, sensory input, and logic. While the sum of the inner neurons' outputs is a variable that determines whether the threshold is reached, this system weighs many variables together before making a final choice. The pulvinar has no regulatory control or influence over the spinocerebellar tracts of the ascending pathways, nor over the indirect pathways, that is, extrapyramidal tracts, of the descending pathways. This is because they are parts of the autonomic system. The autonomic system is essential for the effective functionality of an individual. For example, if you are driving a car or piloting a plane, in a situation where you need to reduce speed or perform another function, you may issue a single regulatory command using your front controls. However, the car or plane automatically adjusts many internal control systems of the engine according to your command. Here, there is no need to explain those details. This is how a system or machine works. Otherwise, any large system would not function properly and would become useless. Similarly, the autonomic system in the human brain is essential for survival. In old age, when this system becomes weak, extra effort or greater concentration is required to complete tasks, or assistance from others may be needed. This means the autonomic system is a vital component for our body to function and perform tasks practically and effectively. In other words, it is necessary for survival. Interneurons are essentially a type of postsynaptic neuron, classified as interneurons due to their location. In the case of looping, the output of one segment is used as the input for another. A loop or feedback loop pathway, that is feedback circuit, modulates and refines ongoing activity by sending information back, looping signals, to earlier stages of processing or control. This is essential to error correction, precise timing, learning, attention, coordination, and other cognitive or motor functions. The pulvinar is a part of this system, and the pulvinar, as a crucial part of thalamus, play a key role in decision-making and exert control over the system. It is similar to the distributed control system, DCS, used in a very large industry, which can function effectively in this manner. You can pause the screen to read the detailed descriptions. With the exception of the spinocerebellar tracts, the pulvinar, as part of the thalamus, exerts influence or regulatory control on the ascending pathways, including significant controls over the reticular activating system rush and the rewarding system. Due to the necessity of certain body movements without conscious awareness, the pulvinar has no direct influence on the spinocerebellar tracts. The pulvinar plays the role of a decision maker in imposing the priority of information through its connections with the reticular activating system rush, including selective ascending and descending pathways, particularly in relation to the outside world. To explain the autonomic, semi-automatic, and decision-making systems of our brain, we can use examples of the semi-automatic system as an intermediate between the autonomic and decision-making systems. Take, for example, saccadic eye movements, head rotation positioning, writing or cycling skills. These actions can be automated, but the pulvinar can pull them back into full attention when needed. This combination is essential for the smooth and effective operation of a system. The pulvinar, through the thalamus or with its support, perceives information from the external world and with the help of internal components and other brain regions, generates an appropriate response and interaction. All parts of the brain support the pulvinar, through the thalamus, for the necessity of the individual's survival. The same basic biological neural network structure is applicable to the neural networks of all locations in the brain. Like an AI visual processing system, a biological visual neural network functions through a group of neurons involved in higher-order processing, finding group-wise numerical values and comparing them, where each group of neurons interprets more complex features from the input, ultimately resulting in the recognition of meaningful objects and scenes. However, the pixels of a picture's frame do not have specific addresses. Instead, the task is accomplished by maintaining sequences and using channels. In some informational contexts, timing and spike patterns can function as addresses, as guided by the beta functions described in the previous equation. In the case of the ascending pathway of the human brain, after synaptic processing, the postsynaptic neuron generates a numerical value that the next stage interprets, assigning its meaning through comparison. For example, in the case of analyzing a nose, first it is determined which mammal's nose it matches with. The numerical values for different mammals are already stored in the memory, and a comparison is made with those. In this way, by combining the meanings of numerous parts, it identifies a mammal and perceives the scene of the mammal in the pulvinar through the thalamus. Similarly, it is also used to identify an individual human being. If the brain were a single entity, then all this processing would be unnecessary. Simply forming an image on the retina would be enough for perception. There would be no need for such extensive processing. A basic AI neural network is shown here, in which all the information related to a specific task must pass through each hidden neuron of this AI neural network. Otherwise, the system will fail to function. Similarly, visual information has to be perceived by certain specific neurons in the pulvinar in order to perceive the scene of the external world and react accordingly. A more detailed explanation will be provided in Part 4. Some examples are mentioned here. In the figure shown, if we identify the beak, that is mouth and nose in this location, we will see a duck. Whereas for the same image, if we identify the mouth and nose in another location, we will see a rabbit. Similarly, in the image shown here, if we identify the mouth and nose in one location, we will see an old woman. Whereas for the same image, if we identify the mouth and nose in another location, we will see a young girl. Another example of an image can be shown here. The figures shown here are very important. In Figure 8a, all 6 balls are exactly the same color, but the upper part of Figure 8a misleads our color perception. In Figure 8b, the 2 gray shades are exactly the same, but on the left side of Figure 8b, they appear completely different to us. This suggests that the pulvinar perceives color after the initial color processing. In Figure 8c, all 4 lines, L1, L2, L3, and L4, are exactly parallel, but the 2 lines on the left side, L1 and L2, appear slightly curved in the middle. These figures are very significant. They indicate that every pixel has an address, and the pulvinar perceives the pixel properties of color and location after the initial processing. To realize the importance of the pulvinar, we can start from the very beginning of embryonic development. The neural tube develops at a very early stage of embryonic development. The brain of the embryo develops from the neural tube. In humans, around 3 to 4 weeks of gestation, the neural tube forms 3 primary brain vesicles. 1. Hindbrain, rhombencephalon. 2. Midbrain, mesencephalon. And 3. Forebrain, prosencephalon. In humans at around 5 weeks of gestation, the prosencephalon, forebrain, divides into two parts. A. Telencephalon. That becomes cerebral cortex, basal ganglia, etc. B. Diencephalon. That becomes thalamus, pulvinar, part of thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and related structures. In humans, the forebrain occupies 85% of the total brain volume. The hindbrain and midbrain are primarily associated with the autonomic system and begin functioning at a very early stage of embryonic development. The development of the cerebral cortex occurs later and takes a long time to mature, as it makes internal adjustments to the pulvinar through the thalamus, as well as adapts to the outside world and environment. The two pulvinars are physically very close, strongly connected, share information, and function in a unified manner. During the development of all parts of the brain, the summation process of the postsynaptic neuron, which receives signals from interneurons, ensures that small missing inputs at any stage do not drastically alter the final output. If one neuron fails or becomes inactive for any reason, the presence of hundreds of other related active neurons ensures that the output remains unaffected. This is a significant spatial characteristic of group-wise activity in a biological neural network. This theory and research is not concerned with what is happening inside a neuron cell. Rather, it is concerned with the biological neural network and the basic perceptual awareness of a living cell. This basic perceptual awareness of a living cell, which eventually, at some stage, emerges up to a level of self-perception or self-awareness or consciousness or full consciousness, depends on its location, the amount and type of information it receives, and its ability to exchange information. Ultimately, these are all fundamentally linked to information and communication. Imagine, I am alone in a cinema hall watching a movie on the screen. If the power goes out, what happens? All visual and sound information will be absent, and I will feel a profound sense of emptiness. It is simply an interruption in the flow of information. Again, if a person has no information or memory and lacks the ability to analyze information, he will just pass through the flow of the present, that is, retaining only a basic level of a perceptual awareness of self-existence, where there is no existence of past and future to himself. In conclusion, the core theme of this theory is very clear. I am a single neuron cell located in the pulvinar. There are some special kinds of functional neuron cells in the pulvinal. I am one of them. That is, I am one of the neurons of that special functional neuron cells located in my pulvinar. I consider myself a unique, independent, single entity. That is, my entire body has a distinct, single entity, or soul, and I make my own decisions and act accordingly. However, this theory and the findings of the research are completely different from people's common beliefs and assumptions. There are several other neurons besides me. They are all thinking the same thing at the same time in the same way because they are within the same system and information. The mystery here is that we don't comprehend the issue, or it could be said we're not accustomed to thinking in this way. That is why at first it might seem peculiar and unbelievable to us. This mysterious phenomenon has been denoted here by the name Zell's entity, the basic level of perceptual awareness of an individual neuron, which eventually at some stage merges up to a level of self-perception or self-awareness or consciousness or full consciousness, depends on the location, amount, and type of information it receives and its ability to exchange information. For the emergence of consciousness, nothing is imposed on our brain from the outside, nor is anything supernatural happening in our brain. Our presentation will be uploaded to YouTube in 4 parts. This one is part 2. We will upload part 3 within the next few weeks, which will present strong supporting evidence for this theory. As per public interest, in part 4 we will explain more details about human brain neural network functions and provide an analysis comparing AI and biological neural networks. Thank you for watching.